Hi, my name is Hannah. That day was when Emily, my twin sister, and I graduated together from the University of California, Berkeley. The May sunlight cast a golden glow across the campus, warm but not harsh, making the green lawns and rustling rows of trees appear even more vibrant. All around, thousands of students in deep blue gowns stood neatly in line, square caps with golden tassels swaying in the breeze as they waited for their turn to step onto the stage and receive their diplomas. Emily and I stood side by side in the crowd, both wearing honor stoles embroidered with the university's logo. The air buzzed with laughter, shouts, and the click of cameras, yet inside me, alongside pride, there was another feeling I couldn't quite name. For 4 years, we had worked tirelessly to graduate with honors together. Friends, professors, and familiar faces filled the lawns, each cheer and burst of applause rolling like waves. From a distance, I saw my parents approaching, their faces bright, carrying a large gift wrapped in red paper, surrounded by a few relatives and Emily's close friends, phones already in hand to record. I smiled, believing this would be a moment the two of us would share equally. But when they were just a few steps away, my mother slipped her arm around Emily's waist and gently pulled her aside, my father following. In the murmur of the crowd, he pulled out a small, glossy box, opened it, and revealed the key to a bright red Tesla Mo. 1. Do 3, its metallic shine catching the dazzling afternoon light. The people around instantly gasped, phones flashing nonstop, some relatives clapping, voices ringing with congratulations. Emily hugged our parents, her face glowing, holding the key high like a trophy. I stayed where I was, my smile faltering slightly as I tried to remain composed. A moment later, my mother turned to me, reached into her handbag, and took out a thin envelope. I accepted it and opened it to find a crisp $50 bill folded neatly inside. She smiled and said lightly, "She needs it more. You're always fine on your own." Each word landed in my ears like a stone. The warmth of the sun suddenly felt icy cold. Swallowing it all down, I gave a small nod, forcing my lips into a false curve while my hand clenched the bill until it crumpled. At that very moment, from the right, a large camera from the local television station which had been filming a feature on outstanding graduates swung toward me. Capturing the image of me standing there in the middle of the joyful crowd, holding a small envelope, my eyes restrained yet hurt. Not a single word was spoken, but everything was recorded, clear down to the blink of an eye. Before I continue this story, I have a question for you. Have you ever been the forgotten child, the one treated unfairly in your own family? Let me know where in the world you're watching from so I'll know I'm not alone. Emily and I were born and raised in Sacramento, California, in a 2-story white house at the end of a street shaded by oak trees. My father was a well-known civil litigation lawyer whose name often appeared in the local paper. My mother was a real estate professional, always impeccably dressed, eloquent, and never missing an opportunity to connect with influential people in the community. To the neighbors, we were the picture-perfect family, a successful father, a graceful mother, and twin daughters who were smart and attractive. But behind that flawless image was an imbalance I had recognized from a very young age. Emily, my twin sister, was outgoing and lively. Even back in kindergarten, she was the center of every party, effortlessly making friends and making adults laugh with her quick wit. In elementary school, Emily joined every club she could, from drama and musical theater to the cheerleading squad. My parents were so proud of her that whenever guests came over, they would open their laptop, scroll through endless photo albums, and talk about Emily's incredible achievements, as if they were introducing a celebrity. I, Hannah, though her twin, was the complete opposite. I could spend hours in the library, buried in science books or tinkering with small experiments in the garage. I won numerous academic awards, from the district math competition to the state science fair. But my medals and certificates hung quietly on my bedroom wall, rarely mentioned in my parents' stories of pride. I remember clearly the first time I truly realized this difference. We were 12. Emily was chosen to play the lead in the school's spring play. My parents had t-shirts printed with her face, invited both sets of grandparents, relatives, and friends to watch. They even booked a large table at an Italian restaurant afterward to celebrate. That same week, I won first place at the district science fair with my project on renewable energy. I brought the award home, excited, thinking I'd be celebrated just like Emily. But my dad only smiled, patted my head, and said, "Good job, Hannah. You'll be fine." Then he went right back to discussing Emily's celebration dinner. "You'll be fine" became a phrase I heard more and more as I grew up, like a mantra my parents used whenever they overlooked me. When Emily failed her driver's test the first time, they immediately hired her a private instructor and still bought her a brand new Honda Civic for her 16th birthday. I was different. When I needed a car to travel between school and the research center, my mom said, "You'll be fine, ride your bike, it's healthy." And so I kept cycling nearly 10 kilometers a day, rain or shine. In high school, Emily competed in cheerleading and track. My parents never missed a single game or meet. I was on the robotics team and the science club, whose competitions were usually held on weekends in dull auditoriums, and I almost always stood on stage accepting awards alone. When I asked why they never came, the answer was always the same: "You'll be fine." That favoritism even crept into the smallest things. Every Christmas, Emily got the most expensive gift, the latest iPhone, a vacation trip, or a premium makeup kit. I got textbooks, or occasionally a sweater, to wear to school. I didn't dislike the gifts, but they were a constant reminder that my parents' expectations for me revolved entirely around studying and taking care of myself, with no room for joy or reward. I used to convince myself that my parents weren't intentionally playing favorites, that they loved us in different ways. But as the years went by, I began to understand that the love wasn't balanced. Emily was loved and pampered in the way any child would dream of. I was trusted to be fine, and because of that, no one felt the need to stand beside me when I actually needed them. That difference created distance not just between me and my parents, but sometimes between me and Emily. Although she never openly belittled me, her silence in the face of unfairness made me feel even more alone. There were times I wondered, if the roles were reversed, could I stay silent like she did? And the answer, though I didn't want to admit it, was no. Growing up in Emily's shadow taught me how to be resilient and self-reliant, but it also planted in me a hollow feeling that's hard to describe. I learned not to expect recognition, not to wait for praise, and not to hope that anyone would take my side. I became someone who could find her own answers, heal her own wounds, and keep moving forward, but the cost was becoming accustomed to being set aside. And that very habit led me to the moment at the Berkeley graduation, standing in the roar of cheers for Emily while receiving from my mother a $50 envelope and the words, "She needs it more. You're always fine on your own." I wasn't surprised. But this time, unlike all the others, a voice deep inside me whispered that maybe it was time to stop being fine in silence. In my first year at UC Berkeley, Emily and I were technically in the same city but living in completely different worlds. Emily chose communications, a field perfectly suited to her outgoing personality. Her classes often ended early, and the rest of her days were filled with photo shoots for her club, social events, and plenty of upscale parties in apartments overlooking the San Francisco Bay. I, on the other hand, majored in computer engineering, a program so demanding it nearly consumed all my time and energy. From the start, I knew I couldn't rely on my parents to cover tuition or living expenses the way they did for Emily. I took a part-time position in the Artificial Intelligence Research Lab under the Computer Science Department, and I also worked as a teaching assistant for an introductory programming course. My schedule was packed: classes in the morning, lab work in the afternoon, teaching in the evening, then heading back to my dorm to code late into the night. The money I earned from those two jobs was just enough to pay rent, buy books, and cover my basic expenses. Meanwhile, Emily still received a set monthly allowance from our parents. It not only let her shop freely for clothes but also funded weekend trips to Los Angeles or Las Vegas with friends. Her Instagram was a curated gallery of party photos, elegant restaurant dinners, and perfectly lit candid shots by the pool, each post racking up hundreds of likes and compliments. I was different. My social media was almost silent, occasionally showing pictures of group projects or snapshots with classmates in the lab. My time wasn't spent on building an image. It was poured into every line of code, every research paper I devoured in search of new ideas. The night I remember most came at the end of the second semester of my sophomore year. My research team had been working for 4 months to develop an AI model that could analyze medical images to detect early signs of lung disease. It was a project I had poured nearly every spare moment into, sleeping in the lab many nights, surviving on instant noodles while working. When our team was selected to present the project at the university's internal research conference, I called my parents immediately. "I want you both to be there," I said over the phone, my voice full of hope. "This is the biggest project I've ever worked on, and I'm the lead presenter." There was a short pause, and then my mother spoke. "Oh, that sounds wonderful, Hannah, but we promised Emily we'd be at the charity club's fundraiser she's hosting that night. You know, she's the main MC and has been preparing for weeks." I sat in silence, the phone burning hot against my ear. "Yes, I understand," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But the truth was, I didn't understand. I didn't understand why an important night for me always had to come second to one of Emily's events, even if it was just another hosting gig she'd done dozens of times before. That evening, I stood on the stage of the engineering auditorium, looking out at the audience. There was my faculty advisor, classmates, a few unfamiliar faces from other research groups, but no parents. When the presentation ended and we received a long round of applause, I still couldn't shake the hollow feeling inside. Emily's night was different. On Facebook, she posted a series of photos from the charity event. Shots of her standing center stage, microphone in hand, her gown sparkling under the lights, my parents beaming in the front row. Those images spread quickly across her social media, drawing hundreds of admiring comments, while my post about the AI project only drew a few congratulatory notes from friends in my field. I wasn't jealous of Emily. I knew she had her own talents and worked hard in her sphere. But the gap in how our parents showed up or didn't for pivotal moments in my life made one thing painfully clear. In my family's story, I was always the supporting character. College passed in that same rhythm. When Emily complained about the difficulty of getting to her events, my parents bought her a Mini Cooper. I still took the bus or relied on friends for rides when I needed to go somewhere outside class or work hours. Emily always had family at her important milestones. I learned to stop inviting them, knowing the answer would always be, "You'll be fine." I began to realize that being overlooked didn't just affect my emotions, it made me shrink into myself. I shared my own successes less, sought less recognition from my family, and instead found my value in numbers on spreadsheets, in code that compiled flawlessly, or in the look of surprise on a professor's face when I offered a new solution. I had learned silence, but I had also learned how to stand on my own, a skill I would later understand was invaluable, though it carried the scar of loneliness. And it was those quiet years of work that laid the foundation for the moment at graduation where I would once again stand next to Emily, but this time the story would not end the way it always had. Because even though my parents still believed I would be fine, I was ready to show them I wasn't just fine, I was strong enough to make them take another look. A week before graduation, I was sitting at the dining table, laptop open as I reviewed my slides for the final rehearsal. I didn't notice my mother's phone on the kitchen counter, still on speaker after she'd called a close friend. She assumed I was too focused on typing to pay attention, but I caught every word of her voice. "Yes, that's right. We've decided to buy Emily a car. Brand new, as a way to start her new life after graduation," my mother said, her tone full of pride. "She'll need it for work, for events, and it's a reward for everything she's accomplished." End of quote. I sat still, my eyes fixed on the screen, but my heart was pounding in my chest. Not once did she mention me, not a single hint that I too was about to enter a new chapter of life. I wasn't surprised this was consistent with everything that had happened over the past 22 years. Still, there was a faint sting deep inside, the kind I had long trained myself to ignore. I listened as my mother and her friend went on discussing the car's color, the dealership, even planning the surprise handover to Emily right after the ceremony. I knew that if I were in her place, I would get a simple congratulations, or, at most, a card with a few generic lines. But I reminded myself not to expect anything. I had grown used to moving forward without rewards from them. Instead of letting my mind spiral into comparisons, I turned back to preparing my speech. Being chosen as one of the distinguished graduates was not only an honor, but also a rare chance to say something truly meaningful in front of thousands of people, including those who had believed in me and stood by me throughout my college years. I wanted this speech to be about more than myself. I wanted it to carry a message for anyone who had ever felt left behind. I spent many evenings alone in the library, drafting and redrafting every section. I wrote about sleepless nights in the lab, about the moment our AI model finally worked for the first time, about the friends who had become my second family at Berkeley. I tried to weave in gratitude for the professors, colleagues, and even the quiet staff who cleaned and prepared the classrooms we had used for 4 years. Every time I paused, I wondered if my parents would be in the audience when I spoke. I knew they would be there, but I also knew their eyes would likely be on Emily more than on me. I told myself that was fine. If they couldn't be proud of me through their actions, I would make them proud through my achievements, whether they wanted to acknowledge them or not. That week, Emily called often to talk about trying on dresses, booking her hair and makeup appointments, and picking the perfect shoes to match the special moment. I listened, smiling, keeping my voice light. She had no idea I had overheard my mother's conversation, or that I was quietly preparing for a ceremony I believed would be a turning point in my life. The night before graduation, I sat by the window, looking out at the city lights, rehearsing my speech one last time. Outside, Berkeley was calm, the occasional sound of cars mixing with the cool breeze drifting in from the San Francisco Bay. I took a deep breath, letting the stillness settle over me. No matter what happened tomorrow, I was ready. Not ready to fight for attention, but ready to stand tall and speak my truth, a voice that had been ignored for far too long. I didn't know then that the moment my parents handed Emily the car keys and me the small envelope would become the breaking point for everything. But deep down, I had a sense that tomorrow, one way or another, the balance would shift, and when it did, I wanted to be truly worthy of it. Graduation day at UC Berkeley began with a morning full of brightness and noise. On the campus lawn, hundreds of students in blue and gold gowns crowded together, snapping pictures in front of giant backdrops that read, "Class of 2020." The scent of roses, the brass music from the marching band, and the shouts of people calling to each other created an atmosphere that was both proud and tinged with urgency. I stood in the middle of the crowd with Emily and our family, preparing to take the once-in-a-lifetime photo before we both stepped into the auditorium to receive our diplomas. My parents were all smiles, relatives forming a circle around us. Cameras and phones held high, the whole thing felt like a staged family photo shoot. "Everyone, gather here," my mother called out, her voice full of excitement. Emily stood beside me, her hair in soft curls, her face glowing under flawless makeup. I smiled too, trying to blend into the cheerful mood, though a quiet thread of doubt lingered in me ever since overhearing my mother's phone call the week before. Still, I hoped that at least today, this event would belong to both of us. Then my father suddenly motioned for everyone to step aside, creating a ceremonious space in the middle of the group. He turned to Emily and handed her a sleek black box. "A gift for my daughter, to start a new chapter," he announced loudly, making sure everyone around could hear. Emily opened the box, and in that moment, the sunlight caught on a gleaming red Tesla Mo 1, Do 3 key. The group erupted instantly, gasps, cheers, applause. Some relatives rushed to hug Emily, while a few of her friends screamed in excitement. Emily turned to hug our parents, grinning ear to ear. "Thank you so much, I don't even know what to say." She held the key high for the cameras, the metallic red reflecting so brightly I had to squint. I stayed where I was, holding my graduation cap, my smile faltering, trying to hide the pang of disappointment. Then my mother turned to me, as if suddenly remembering I was there. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a thin white envelope, and placed it in my hand. "Here you go," she said lightly, as if offering a token gesture. I opened it to find a crisp $50 bill, folded neatly in half. "She needs it more," she added, nodding toward Emily. "You're always fine on your own." The words cut into my ears, each one landing heavier than the midday heat. I swallowed every reaction, forcing a faint smile, but my grip on the envelope tightened until it crumpled. Around us, the air seemed to pause for a beat. My closest friends, standing a few meters away, glanced over with uneasy expressions, a few shaking their heads in disbelief. Then I noticed, right beside us, a group of reporters from the local television station. They had been invited to cover outstanding graduates, and I, thanks to my academic record and research project, was one of them. Their camera was trained directly on us, recording every detail. Emily receiving the car key to roaring cheers, and seconds later, me receiving the envelope with the words, "She needs it more." A female reporter stepped closer, microphone in hand. She started to ask a question, but her gaze flickered when she saw me still holding the envelope. "How do you feel today, as you're about to receive your UC Berkeley diploma?" she asked, her professional tone tinged with caution. I took a deep breath, smiling broadly as if nothing had happened. "I'm proud of what I've accomplished, and I'm ready for the next chapter." The camera kept rolling, catching every glance, every gesture. I knew this moment wouldn't disappear. It would live somewhere in the footage of the day, proof of how I had learned, from a very young age, to swallow disappointment and keep standing tall. But deep down, I felt it clearly. This was the final drop in the glass. When I stepped onto the stage to receive my diploma, the midday sun in Berkeley lit up, thousands of faces turned toward the platform. The sound of applause echoed across the campus lawn, blending with the music from the brass band. I smiled, accepted the diploma from the university president, gave a slight bow in thanks, and began to turn to step down like every other graduate. But suddenly, the ceremonies MC, a veteran professor from my department, spoke into the microphone, his voice ringing clearly through the loudspeakers. "Please remain seated. Before we continue, the organizers have a special announcement for one of this year's outstanding graduates." The chatter in the auditorium instantly softened, leaving only the faint rustle of graduation gowns. I stopped in the middle of the stage, hesitating for a moment, not sure what was happening. The MC smiled and turned toward me. "Today, we are not only celebrating the academic excellence of Hannah Miller, but also honoring her with a national award." After a rigorous selection process lasting over a year, the Gates Foundation Council has officially awarded Hannah Miller the National Technology Research Prize, valued at $250,000. This award includes startup funding, intensive mentorship, and an opportunity to work at the Silicon Valley Technology Hub. The entire campus seemed to erupt. Applause thundered through the air, quickly joined by cheers. Some students jumped to their feet, whistling in congratulations. I stood frozen for a few seconds, feeling as if time had stopped. The MC's words echoed in my mind, but my eyes instinctively searched the audience where my family sat. My father was stiff, his hand gripping the chair, eyes wide as if he had just heard something beyond belief. My mother kept her polite smile, though the corner of her mouth twitched and her eyes blinked rapidly. Emily, still wearing her own honorary ribbon, stared at me in wide-eyed surprise, then suddenly laughed and clapped hard, as if determined for her applause to rise above the rest. The MC's voice came again. "And to present this award, please welcome to the stage Miss Catherine Ross, Chief Technology Officer of Novatech." I recognized the name instantly. Catherine had been my secret mentor for the past 2 years, the one who quietly guided me through research projects, introduced me to elite tech teams, and whom I had never once mentioned to my family. She had always told me that sometimes keeping your strongest cards hidden until the final moment can make the biggest impact. And now, I understood exactly what she meant. Catherine stepped out from backstage, her silver hair catching the sunlight, dressed in a simple yet sharp black suit. As she approached, the applause swelled again. She gave me a brief but firm hug, then spoke into the microphone. "Hannah is not just an exceptional student. She is living proof of perseverance, creativity, and never allowing circumstances to define her worth. Over the past 2 years, I've watched her turn ideas into tangible products, and I can say with certainty, the future of technology will bear the mark of Hannah Miller. Ah! The applause returned, lasting so long that the MC had to wait a few seconds before continuing the program. Catherine handed me a large certificate bearing the Gates Foundation logo and an envelope containing the official invitation to the Silicon Valley Mentorship Program. I bowed my head in thanks, my hands trembling slightly around the microphone, but my voice was steady and clear. Thank you to everyone here, thank you to the Gates Foundation, and especially to those who believed in me even when not everyone did. This achievement is not just for me, but for anyone who has ever been underestimated and still refused to give up. As I stepped down from the stage, dozens of students, professors, and guests surrounded me with congratulations. Many asked about the award-winning project, my plans for the startup, and how it felt to receive such an honor in front of thousands. Among them, I caught sight of a few familiar faces from the communications department, friends of Emily making their way over to shake my hand. From a distance, I saw my parents still sitting frozen, as if they hadn't yet caught up to what had just happened. The bright red Tesla Mo. 1, Do 3, parked at the edge of the campus, now looked like a forgotten prop. Emily stood next to them, but her gaze was fixed on me, and this time, I could see she was truly proud. I knew in that moment everything had shifted. I was no longer Hannah the daughter who would manage on her own, or Hannah the one who's always fine. I was Hannah Miller, recipient of one of the nation's most prestigious awards, with a future even my parents couldn't control or define. More importantly, for the first time in my life, I felt every pair of eyes in the crowd wasn't just glancing past me, they were actually stopping, looking straight at me. As the crowd began to thin, I was still surrounded by handshakes, congratulations, and questions about my research. But through the noise, I saw my parents and Emily approaching. They walked slowly, as if crossing into unfamiliar territory, each step weighted. Their smiles were tight, strained enough for me to notice even from a distance. My father spoke first, his voice low and slightly hoarse, as though he had to swallow something difficult before speaking. "We are very proud of you, Hannah," he said, emphasizing each word. I looked him straight in the eye, sensing the awkwardness and uncertainty behind his statement. My mother stood beside him, nodding rapidly, her hands clutching her handbag like it was a lifeline. Emily stayed silent, her gaze shifting between me and our parents, as if waiting to see what would happen next. I drew in a deep breath, keeping my voice calm. "You've loved us in different ways," I said slowly, clearly. "But only one of us has ever been celebrated." I saw my mother's eyes flicker instantly, and my father tilt his head slightly, as if searching for a rebuttal but finding no words that would fit. A silence stretched for several seconds, then my father reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a gleaming set of keys. He held them out toward me, his voice stiff. "We want to make it right. These are the keys to another Tesla. We ordered it as soon as we heard about your award. It'll be delivered to you next week." I looked at the keys, recognizing immediately the way they were trying to balance the story in their own terms. The gift didn't come from a genuine desire to acknowledge my achievements from the start, it was a rushed reaction to the fact that their image and narrative had been publicly challenged. I shook my head slightly, a coldness spreading from my chest down to my hands. "No," I said firmly. "It's too late to make things even." The words cut clean, slicing through the illusion that a single gift could erase years of being overlooked. My mother quickly stepped in, her voice trembling slightly. "Don't say that. We just wanted to give both of you the best. Sometimes, we thought you were stronger, that you could handle things on your own, so." I cut her off, not raising my voice, but firm. "Mom, that has always been the reason. You'll be fine. You don't need as much as she does. But you don't understand, every time you said that, it was another time you chose her over me. And today, when you handed me $50 in front of everyone and said she needed it more, you made clear what I've known all along." My father tried to keep his tone calm. "We can't go back to the past, but we can start over. I looked at the keys still resting in his hand. Starting over isn't with a car. Starting over is when you truly see me, not just when I do something big enough for others to notice. And it has to come from the heart, not from a fear of losing face. Wow. Emily finally spoke, her voice small but steady. Hannah's right. I love this car, but I know exactly what it stands for. And what I wish is that you'd done the same for Hannah, not now, but years ago. My parents said nothing. I could see the unease in their eyes, the kind of silence that comes not because there's nothing left to say, but because every excuse at this point would be meaningless. Finally, I gently pushed the keys back into my father's hand. I'll take the bus home, like always. And I'll still be fine just as I've always been. But at least now, you know I don't need your approval to feel like I matter. I turned and walked away, feeling their eyes follow me. In that moment, I didn't feel angry or sad anymore. There was only clarity and open space in my heart where I knew I could start a new chapter of my life without waiting for anyone to hand me the keys. Leaving the ceremony that day, I knew one thing for certain: this would be the final turning point between me and my parents. Not because I wanted revenge or to prove anything, but because I was too tired of existing in a system where my worth was always defined by comparison. The Gates Foundation Award was more than just money. That $250,000 was my ticket out of the bindings that had held me for over 2 decades. The next day, I began making plans. Instead of staying in Sacramento or Berkeley, I chose San Francisco, the heart of every tech dream, where even a coffee shop could be the birthplace of an idea that might change the world. With the funding, I rented a small but bright apartment in the Soma district, not far from the offices of AI and medical startup companies. It wasn't as luxurious as my parents' house, but when I stepped inside, I felt something that place had never given me: complete freedom. I spent almost the entire first month building my team. Some were former classmates from Berkeley, others were young engineers I met at networking events. All of them were excited by my vision. Using AI to analyze community health data to detect early signs of disease outbreaks and optimize treatment processes. This wasn't a project designed for quick headlines, it was a long-term journey. But I knew I was finally on the right path. When it came to my family, I decided to cut off all financial support and limit any unnecessary contact. My parents still sent messages, sometimes with small talk like, "Are you eating well?" or "When will you come home to visit?" I replied briefly and politely, but never let the conversations stretch on. Not because I hated them, but because I needed the distance to keep my focus and to redefine this relationship in a healthier way. Emily called me from time to time. She talked about her new job in communications and admitted that her relationship with our parents had changed since the ceremony. "They still try to control things," Emily said, "but at least now they know their favoritism has been exposed, and it doesn't work the way it used to." I smiled and told her that I hoped one day the 4 of us could sit together without feeling like we were playing a game with a predetermined outcome. For now, though, all my energy went into the company. We began attracting attention from a few angel investment funds in Silicon Valley, thanks to the award's prestige and the network Catherine Ross had helped me build. She remained my most trusted mentor, always reminding me, "Every time you succeed without asking for permission, you're breaking another piece of that chain." There were nights I stayed up until 2 or 3 in the morning, coding while reviewing machine learning models. In those quiet hours, I realized I no longer felt the loneliness I once did. Instead, I felt connected to a community of people who dared to dream big and to push back against the limits others tried to place on them. One afternoon at the office, I got an email from a major tech magazine inviting me to be featured in their Young Founders column. They wanted to photograph me with my team and talk about my journey from underestimated student to founder of a medical AI company. I read it and laughed, not from being overly excited, but because I knew, if that story was published, my parents would definitely see it. But unlike before, I didn't need them to read it to prove anything. I was living my own life, with success defined by me. And whenever I thought about that $50 envelope from graduation day, it no longer hurt. It was just a marker, the starting point of the path I chose to walk, without looking back. San Francisco might be expensive, and a startup might be risky, but here, I got to be me. Not someone's copy, not Emily's shadow, and certainly not the always fine daughter my parents felt safe ignoring. This was my new story, and this time, I was the one holding the pen. About 3 months after I moved to San Francisco, while my company was in the testing phase of its first product, Emily called to say she'd be visiting. Her voice carried a hint of hesitation, as if she wasn't sure I would agree. But I said, "Come, we need to talk." The next day, she showed up at the door of my small Soma office. Emily wore a simple sweater, nothing like the elaborate dresses that usually filled her social media photos. When she stepped inside, she looked around and smiled. "This place, it's so you." No frills, but focused and full of energy. I poured her a cup of coffee and gestured toward the small sofa by the window. She was quiet for a few seconds, then began. "Hannah, I want to apologize. Not just for the car at graduation, but for all the years before that. I know Mom and Dad always favored me, and I stayed silent, benefiting from it. I thought, if I didn't object, things would stay peaceful. But the truth is, I was trapped too." I tilted my head slightly, signaling for her to go on. Emily took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the cup of coffee in her hands. Being the golden child sounds comfortable, but it's like living in a gilded cage. Mom and Dad control everything, the job I choose, the person I date, even the way I dress. Whenever I want to do something they don't approve of, they remind me how much they've invested in me. Over time, I got scared of losing their approval. I stayed quiet, listening. For the first time, I saw a clear crack in Emily's confident exterior. I remembered the look in her eyes at the ceremony when she clapped for me with no trace of envy or rivalry. That night, Emily continued, "When I saw everyone stand up and applaud you, I realized you'd done it all without anyone paving the way for you. And I was jealous, but not in a bad way. I was jealous of your freedom. I want to break free from the way Mom and Dad define my worth." I set my cup down and looked her straight in the eye. "I used to think you didn't see what was happening to me, that you chose to stand with them, not with me. But if you truly want out, I think we can start over." Emily looked up, her eyes a little brighter. "Start over? How?" "It means," I said slowly, "we build our relationship without Mom and Dad in the middle. No comparisons, no competition, no letting them use one person's success or failure to define the other. You have your life, I have mine. But we'll still be sisters, supporting each other, not pawns in their game." Emily smiled, and this time it was genuine. "I want that. I'm tired of playing the perfect role for them. And I know you're tired of being the self-sufficient one they can safely ignore." We talked the whole afternoon. Emily told me about the times she wanted to refuse expensive gifts but was afraid of being seen as ungrateful, the times she felt pressured to shine in front of relatives. I told her about the feeling of being overlooked, about the parties and ceremonies where I was just the shadow in the background. Finally, as the day turned toward evening, we stood on the small balcony of my office. Looking out at the San Francisco skyline, Emily held out her hand. "Deal?" I took her hand. "Deal. I bay." In that moment, I knew that even if my relationship with our parents would never be perfect, I had regained something far more valuable, a sister who was finally standing beside me, not out of obligation, but out of choice. I know there are many people listening to this who see themselves in this story. Maybe you're the forgotten child, the one always in the background, the one your family believes will be fine, and therefore never needs much attention. You grow up on scraps of praise, with your moments of success brushed aside because someone else in the family deserves it more. You learn to be silent, to hold yourself up, and sometimes, to believe you'll never be special enough to be chosen. But here's the truth. You don't need to be chosen to be worthy. Your value doesn't come from someone handing you a gift, an opportunity, or a compliment. It comes from you, from every night you stayed up late working toward your dream, from every time you stood back up after being overlooked, from the fact that you kept moving forward even when no one was standing behind you to cheer. It took me years to understand that recognition isn't something you have to beg for. You can create it, you can give it to yourself, and when you do, you no longer depend on whether anyone chooses to see you. Today, I sit behind the wheel in a car that isn't a gift from my parents, but something I bought with the money I earned myself. The road ahead leads straight toward the Golden Gate Bridge. Afternoon light spills across the water, reflecting up through the windshield, wrapping me in a warm golden hue. I turn on the radio, let the ocean wind rush in, and smile not because I've won against my parents or anyone else, but because I've reclaimed the right to steer the story of my own life. If you're where I once was, remember this. You don't need someone to hand you the keys to step out of the cage they built for you. You only need to believe you can open the door and walk through it. And when you do, you'll realize that freedom and self-ownership are the greatest gifts you will ever have.